Hi, my name is Mr. Hernandez, and I'm going to be refuting Soledad's argument that video games affect kids negatively. And she has three supporting claims. Video games have a negative effect on the brain, video games promote violence in children, and playing video games harms the health of children. Now, for her first claim, she starts off by saying that playing lots of video games actually changes the brain structures of those kids. And to back it up, she cites an article called Video Games Can Change Your Brain from ScienceData.com. The exact quote she used was, "The results of 116 scientific studies have shown that playing video games can change how our brains perform and even their structure." Now that sounds bad, but she actually left out some important info later in the article. The article then goes on to say that playing video games affects our attention, and the studies found that gamers show improvements in several types of attention, such as sustained attention and selective attention. The brain regions involved in attention are also more efficient in gamers and require less activation to sustain attention on demanding tasks. So she left that part out because it basically goes against that whole argument. And moving on to her second claim that video games promote violence in children, she says that 89% of games have some sort of violent content in them, and the kids are rewarded for that violent content. Basically, these video games have like a rewards-based system where the more violent you are, the more you can progress with the game, and she equates that to that kids will carry that kind of idea into the real life and they'll become more aggressive in real life. But all of the articles she used for this claim are outdated. The oldest goes back to 2004 and the latest is from 2011. And that's important because my research goes against this quite a bit. Because if her claim is true, then as the video game sales have risen, it should also mean that kids are becoming more violent, but that's not the case. From procon.org, under the title, "Do Violent Video Games Contribute to Youth Violence?" I found two infographics that compare youth violent crime rates in video game sales. Video game sales and revenue in 1998 made about $39 billion, and that's increased in 2015 to about $56 billion. But in 1998, the violent crime rates of youths was about, reported was about 60,000, and that's dropped down in just to 2015 to 220. So that evidence alone kind of goes against what she was saying. And now moving on to her third supporting argument, she basically says that video games are addictive, and that kids, when they're playing video games, they're usually sitting inside and eating unhealthy snacks, which kind of leads to the ever-growing obesity problem of children in America. But when I did my own research, I found counterclaims to this. From an article called "Are Video Games Really Addictive?" from theguardian.com, Mark Lewis, who is a neuroscientist and has published multiple books on the biology of addiction, wrote, "Video game playing is rarely addictive. That makes it a very different animal from gambling or binge eating. Experts estimate that problematic play is exhibited by only 0.5 of the general population." It then goes on to say, not only does internet gaming disorder have no adverse effects on health, socializing, or physical activity, but there has been an outcry from researchers and scholars warning of the dangers of pathologizing a normal behavioral outlet. And she also compares two different types of kids in this section. Kids who play video games after school and kids who like read and study after school. Basically saying that kids who study will do better in school. And that might be true, but it doesn't really belong in this argument because she doesn't provide any evidence saying that kids who play video games even do bad in school at all. So basically, video games, I don't think that video games really do affect kids negatively. Thank you.
All right, the structural stuff is pretty solid. That first point that suggests that The research that the advocate presented had additional information in it that reaches a conclusion that does admit that it changes the brain, but it changes it in a positive way. I thought was pretty effective at undermining the claim that was being made there. The notion that violence is connected to the games, you kind of look at a straightforward comparison with some of the data, and you mentioned the infographics. What I didn't understand about this is that the second part, when you're talking about the statistics on crime, you got 1998, 60,000 violent crimes or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how it's measured. And then the later statistic, it's like 220 crimes. That doesn't, I'm not saying that couldn't be true, but it sure as hell doesn't sound like it's true. I think you get 220 crimes just driving to get a video game, much less after playing the video games. There's something missing from this statistic that is just not clear. I'm not saying that you don't have the right argument here. I'm just saying that the evidence itself is not clear. As a consequence, it makes your argument less compelling and less acceptable. The argument on addiction, I think you do a much better job of suggesting that people are pathologizing this behavior when it's not really all that significant, and even when it does occur, it doesn't really have any adverse consequences. I'm not sure if the advocate proved if there were any adverse consequences. Most of them had to do with people eating more or sitting too much. I don't remember what their information on that point was. You don't really have any direct response on that, except you're kind of diminishing the amount of addictive behavior that's going on there. And then the other argument is about whether or not it has any effect on their ability to learn and perform. And you've got a good press here about the kids who read versus the kids who play, and that's perfectly fine. I just think that since you found information on the other points, it feels a little thin that you don't have data on this particular point. All right, thank you.